feels weird after loving a game like Final Fantasy VII for pretty much my entire life to finally be able to say I've played the remake. After all the wondering how such and such would look, or how this bit will play, or maybe will they include that awesome bit where, well, you know how it goes. I actually have the answers to the millions of questions I had. It's been a long road, and I'm sure like many Final Fantasy VII fans, part of me never thought we'd get here. But many hours in, I've scoured the entire length and breadth of an expanded Midgar, I've caught up with some very dear old friends, and, I'll be honest, it's been emotional. So, here we go. As a huge fan of the original, here's everything I loved about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Plus, a few things I didn't. There's no getting off of this train we're on. It can't be an easy or entirely dauntless task to rewrite one of the most beloved stories in video game history. And given how more recent entries into the Final Fantasy franchise have been received, even FF7's most optimistic fans were nervous as to how their favourite characters, moments, and story arcs would weather the transition. But I'm happy to say that, for the most part at least, the spirit and tone of the original Final Fantasy VII is perfectly preserved and, dare I say, frequently even improved upon in the remake's telling of the story. Characters you know and love are fizzing with new life and personality, their expressions and movements and little asides capturing the essence of what made them so iconic and enduring. Even the dialogue, which many feared would be stilted and wooden given some trailer previews, mostly hits the mark. There are actually plenty of laugh-out-loud moments as the party chat, bicker, and get to know one another on their journey. And, just for the record, I think this is one of the thirstiest games I have ever played. Square knows exactly what it's doing as it toys with your affections, making you fall in love with one character after another. If I had my way, it wouldn't be so much a love triangle as a love decagon. Just get ready to have your heart absolutely broken.
How many times do I have to tell you people? I'm not...
There's such a thing as playing too hard to get. Sorry to keep you thirsty boys waiting.
What's pretty surprising, though, is that although the remake is respectful of the original FF7 for the majority of its runtime, right down to specific lines of dialogue being said just so, NPCs being dressed a certain way, and OG fans being able to navigate themselves to special areas based on memory, it has made a lot of changes too, some small and some story-alteringly huge. The Wall Market, for example, retains most of the little narrative details that made the place so special and so fun to explore, but these details have been reworked so that even if, like me, you know the original like the back of your Buster Sword, exploring those neon-tinged backstreets isn't without some surprises. Those bigger narrative beats that have been reworked, we don't want to spoil here, and to be fair, it's far too early to say whether they've changed things for better or for worse, but they have changed things, and we definitely have our theories, as many other fans will too, as to what this will mean going forward. The implications could be absolutely massive is all we'll say, and that should certainly keep things interesting as we begin the agonizing wait for part 2.
Really? Let me see.
Are we seriously doing this here? That's... wow.
You guys are the worst!
Huh? Your ass is fine. Maybe singed, but the only casualty is your underwear. This is like a bruise or a mild burn at worst.
Now that was a gunshot.
Okay, now I'm mad.
Zero, one of Wall Market's own, a renowned master of beasts!
As anyone who has followed development of the FF7 remake will already know, combat is also very different here, as it's been updated in order to keep pace with modern players. You now control the party as they move freely around the field of battle in real time, where blocking or carrying out basic attacks fill an ATB, or active time battle, bar. With each filled section of this gauge, you can press X to slow time to an almost complete stop and use unique abilities, items, or spells to make the real difference in combat. It's a mostly smooth transition from the old combat style to the new, and it is far more tactical than it first appears. There are some issues, however, especially prevalent in late game. For one, the enemy AI has a tendency to immediately switch its attention to whichever party member the player currently controls. And when you're forced to switch in particularly difficult fights, this makes it incredibly hard to see your strategic planning and placement through to a satisfying conclusion. But mostly, it's a thrilling system that capitalizes on the individual strengths of each party member, making each one distinctive and exciting to control. As always, you'll be leaning on magical orbs of materia to do a lot of the heavy lifting too. And although there are lots of new materia types for even veteran FF7 players to get their head around, it all clicks into place fairly organically. Other new additions include weapon upgrades and weapon skills, whereby you can improve a weapon over the course of the game by spending a character's skill points, or SP, to alter its core stats. And characters can add each weapon's unique ability to their arsenal by performing that ability a set amount of times, meaning they can then access that ability without that particular weapon being equipped. The weapon upgrading system may not be quite as deep or as useful as it appears, as you're probably unlikely to go back to a weapon even after upgrading once you acquire a newer, shinier piece. But the weapon ability mechanic was definitely useful, as it really felt like each character blossomed into their specific role, long range, melee, caster, brawler, as time went on. Anyone worried that the FF7 remake would feel like a cheap hack and slash can rest assured that this is not the case. It might look like you can button bash your way to victory at first glance, but most battles insist that you learn elemental weaknesses, stagger points, or an enemy's specific counter, or you will be soundly punished. Some big boss fights had the gloss taken off them slightly by a camera that simply couldn't keep up, or a battlefield that was a little too confused or crowded to navigate, but for most of the game's running time, controlling Cloud & Co. in combat really is a treat. Of course, you'll be doing more than just fighting. There are loads of collectibles to find, for example, and there's mini-games, from darts to dancing, to have fun with. Plus, plenty of activities that were minor asides in the original have been expanded upon here too. One major worry we had prior to playing the remake was that it would simply be too short, or that it would skimp on or gloss over the very specific details that we've committed to our hearts and memories over the years. But thankfully, Final Fantasy VII Remake is huge. It took us maybe 45.5 hours to see the main story through to its dramatic conclusion. And even though we felt we were being fairly thorough in exploring and investigating all side missions and story options, there are still quite a few secrets left to uncover, including new summons, new materia, and new weapons. Luckily, completing the game opens up a sort of New Game Plus chapter select option, where you can go back and search for anything you've missed. More important than that though, it really feels like the developers knew how meaningful it was that they include even the seemingly inconsequential or throwaway things that fans will 100% be looking out for. This loving and lavish attention to detail and tradition throughout most of the remake's runtime does make some of the developers' choices towards endgame seem somewhat confusing, but it will certainly set the internet alight with discussion.
Hot damn, we are good!
Yes! Bombs detonated 1, members lost 0.
And one step closer to a brighter future.
Hell yeah!
Guys! Lower your voices, huh? People are listening.
Oh, right.
Welcome to Wall Market!
The FF7 remake follows a pattern, whereby you'll explore a couple of fairly linear areas before coming to a sort of hub where your path will open up and you can explore, backtrack, and pick up a handful of optional side quests. It's in these hubs that the overall quality sometimes takes a dip, as these quests will often have you wandering up and down the same branching corridors, searching for an NPC or an enemy spawn to trigger. That wouldn't be so bad, but technically, the game can be a mess. It's in these hub areas, especially, that the Final Fantasy VII Remake seems very poorly optimized, at least at launch. Some textures load slowly, if they load at all, making some assets look like they were lifted from the PlayStation 2 era. And in later sections, we encountered some frustrating data streaming issues, where you trigger dialogue with an NPC and it'd take several seconds for the game to load in. These issues are probably minor in the grand scheme of things, and in the game's ambition overall, and they are the kind of problem that can likely be fixed at a later date with some optimization. But they are worth mentioning, the texture issue in particular, because as a fan, their presence in the foreground or background of a scene in the game's current state did detract from some otherwise beautiful moments, which is a real shame. And they wouldn't be quite as noticeable perhaps if other parts of the game didn't look so stunningly gorgeous. It's maybe a blessing and a curse that the really die-hard Final Fantasy VII fans are the ones both more likely to notice these issues and the ones more likely to forgive them, given how the game gets so many other things right.
Where have you two been? I've been worried sick.
One of the worst things about the Final Fantasy VII Remake is how long we have to wait for the next installment, and the other thing we can't talk about for fear of spoilers. But I do feel safe in saying that, for the most part, the Final Fantasy VII Remake gave me everything I was looking for. With a game like Final Fantasy VII, which is so loved by so many people that have played it, it'll mean different things to each one of those players. What I think it got right, another fan may disagree with, and that doesn't mean either of us are wrong. But even though changes have been made in the remake, I do feel like the core essence and spirit of Final Fantasy VII has been preserved beautifully in this installment. Will it still be enjoyable and accessible to newcomers? Well, that I can't be sure of, but I think so. What future installments have in store? Who knows? But this remake gave us some beautiful moments in a universe some players have spent 23 years falling in love with. And that alone is pretty special.
Think of it as a memento. Cloud? Is that you? Oh my god, that makeup! And that dress!
Nailed it, I know, thank you. Moving on.
If you enjoyed this video, do give it a like, and subscribe for a lot more Final Fantasy VII Remake videos coming very soon, including a Let's Play and plenty more in-depth content for those wanting a deeper dive on what we couldn't discuss here. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Bye!